Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me for this campaign finance-oriented training. My name is Michael Beckel, and I'm the research director at Issue One, a bipartisan political reform organization based in Washington, D.C. Prior to joining Issue One 5 years ago as the research director, I worked as an investigative reporter and journalist for roughly a decade, including stints at OpenSecrets.org and the Center for Public Integrity. So I've long been a follower of money in politics, an observer of the major campaign funding and spending trends. And I had a front row seat to the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision back in 2010 while I was working at OpenSecrets. And that is a decision that we're going to talk a lot about today, as it has changed dramatically the way that money flows into elections and campaigns with the rise of super PACs and dark money groups. So without further ado, I will start sharing our presentation for today. And if you've got any questions, feel free to save those for the end of the presentation or reach out to me directly. My contact information will be shared at the end of this presentation as well. So thank you so much for your time and your interest in this topic. And here we go. So yes, this is tips for tracking outside spending in elections. My name is Michael Beckel, Research Director at Issue One. And when I talk about the phrase outside spending, and you might hear other advocates and campaigns and political scientists use this term, I thought it would be smart for us to all be on the same page about what exactly this means. The bottom line today is that candidates alone aren't the only ones spending money in elections. Since the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision in 2010, there has been a proliferation of spending by groups that can receive contributions of unlimited size and spend those funds in elections. And one key is that these groups legally cannot coordinate their spending with the candidates, although as we'll talk about later in this presentation, many do push that envelope. And so these are groups that by law are supposed to be independent from the candidates that they're boosting. And as you'll see, they have become major players, especially in the most competitive House races and most competitive Senate races. And that's a trend that has trickled down ballot as well. I also want to get on the same wavelength about a couple other key phrases that you'll hear lawyers and journalists sometimes use. The phrase independent expenditure is a legal term of art used to describe spending by an independent group that expressly advocates for the election or defeat of a candidate. These expenditures can be TV ads, can be radio ads, can be digital ads, can be mailers, can be canvassers going door to door, and typically all of these messages would use words like vote for or vote against, and these types of expenditures have to be reported to the Federal Election Commission on a very regular basis for federal races. The term electioneering communication is also a term that gets thrown around from time to time, and that is a legal term of art that was created by the McCain-Feingold Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002 to describe broadcast ads that mention a candidate shortly before an election, but don't expressly advocate for their election or defeat. So these are often called so-called issue ads that mention a candidate, often in a negative light, sometimes in a positive light, but these types of ads have to be broadcast and have to be either within 30 days of a primary or 30 days or sorry, 60 days of the general election. And when those conditions are met, they're targeted, they're mentioning or showing a candidate, they're within this window before an election, they get reported to the Federal Election Commission as well. But the exact same ad could run 61 days or 70 days or 90 days before a general election and potentially not need to be reported to the FEC as spending because it didn't meet all three of those criteria. And so this is another way that you see a lot of groups spend money in elections, especially the dark money groups that are often active. And there's also a push in Washington right now to try to make sure that digital ads and digital spending play by the same rules as broadcast ads, because these messages that might mention a candidate but fail to overtly advocate for their election or defeat can fly under the radar. And it's hard for the public or for journalists to follow all the trends. You can't count what you can't see, kind of thing. And so these are two phrases that will sort of be in the background of what we're talking about today. And really, there's two types of main groups when we talk about outside spending groups. First and foremost are the super PACs, the supersized political action committees that have the superpower of taking money from donors in unlimited amounts. So they can take money from individuals, from corporations, from labor unions, from other nonprofit sources, certain types of nonprofits, at least, such as trade associations or 501c4 social welfare organizations, which are often called dark money groups. And that's the second bucket of groups here that you see on this slide. So the big difference between super PACs and dark money groups is that super PACs have the primary purpose of influencing elections, while the primary purpose of a dark money group cannot be to influence elections. If they have the primary purpose of influencing an election, they should register as a super PAC and disclose all of their donors to the FEC. Yet the post-Citizens United world has wrought a reality in which dark money groups, these 501c4 or 501c6 nonprofits, frequently, dark money groups are frequently organized under those two sections of the tax code. They can still spend very significant sums on politics as long as they are not spending 50% or more of their spending on those overt political ads. So dark money groups generally are not required to report their donors to the FEC, while super PACs must regularly report their donors to the FEC. And both super PACs and dark money groups run a lot of political ads. They're allowed to run political ads or fund other groups that can run ads in turn. So those are two major groups, major terms, major categories of outside spending groups that we'll be talking about for the rest of this presentation. One other big question that you might be asking yourself, especially in the run-up to an election, is what kind of activity can you see from outside groups prior to election day? When it comes to spending, both super PACs and dark money groups need to report their pre-election independent expenditures and electioneering communications to the FEC. But that's not the only place that you might find evidence of their spending in an election. You may also see some pre-election spending by these groups by monitoring things such as TV ad buys using the FCC database, or see digital ad buys, tracking Facebook, YouTube, Google, different social media platforms. If you've got a relationship with an ad buyer in your region, sometimes ad buyers can also help you gain insight into when a new group is starting to spend. And we're going to talk through these a little bit more. The FEC data, again, is sort of the first place that a lot of folks start looking. And the wonderful organization OpenSecrets.org does a lot of heavy lifting, making FEC data accessible to the public and to the press. And here is one of my favorite pages on OpenSecrets.org. It's talking about the outside spending in elections. So as you can see here, we've got a little chart showing the cycle to date outside spending by all outside groups, and also a list of which organizations are the top outside spenders this cycle. OpenSecrets categorizes them into liberal or conservative, shows you if they were, mostly reporting independent expenditures or electioneering communications or other communication costs, if they're a super PAC, if they're a 501c organization, if, basically doing some of that classification for us to help us gain a better understanding of who these groups might be. So this page on OpenSecrets is really great to monitor. But as I mentioned, the FEC data, and OpenSecrets uses FEC data for much of its work, isn't necessarily just the only place to look. The FCC has a database where you can monitor TV ad buys, see TV reservations, sometimes weeks or months in advance, all of the contracts, all of the flight dates, all of, which shows is somebody trying to advertise on, what types of demographics is a group trying to reach. All of that can be searched for on a station-by-station basis on the FCC .gov website, so publicfiles.fcc.gov, and this is linked to in the tip sheet that will be shared with folks as well. But basically, if you have a local TV station and you want to see who's broadcasting, who's buying ads for broadcast TV, this is a great place to dig into some of that information. As I mentioned, in the last few years, there's also been a push for more transparency for digital ads and digital political ads in particular. So under pressure, groups, companies such as Google and Facebook have created their own ad libraries, and these can be invaluable resources to see new digital ads in your area or about races that you care about. There's a lot of information to dig into in terms of searching for a specific candidate being targeted or a specific group starting to run ads in a race that you care about. So again, there's links to both of these in the tip sheet, but the Facebook political ad library now with its parent company Meta running the show, and the Google ad library. The Facebook Meta ad library covers both Facebook ads and Instagram ads. The Google ad library covers both Google ads and YouTube ads. So really great resources to kind of get a larger picture and to actually see the ads that people are being rendered, different demographics, different targeting audiences. A very common key question that I think you will all be asking either before or after election days: who's funding this super PAC? And again, when we're talking about super PACs, all super PACs must report their donors to the Federal Election Commission. Unfortunately, we are seeing a trend where sometimes super PACs are funded by dark money sources, obscuring the public's right to know and obscuring your ability to necessarily figure out who is behind a super PAC. If you've got a troubling situation like that, feel free to call us or feel free to call other advocates like the Campaign Legal Center in Washington, D.C. There's a number of organizations that can help provide insight into this and comment on these kind of situations. And again, it's really going against the spirit of the law if a super PAC, which must by law disclose its donors, is getting a bunch of money from an opaque source. And if that is being funneled through an opaque source intentionally to skirt the limelight, that really raises serious and troubling questions. And in the next several weeks here ahead of the 2022 midterm elections, there are some key campaign finance filing deadlines for all super PACs that I want you all to be aware of. Basically, any political committee, whether it's a super PAC or a party committee or a traditional PAC or a candidate committee, they have to file regular reports with the Federal Election Commission, and candidates have to file quarterly reports, and party committees and traditional PACs and super PACs all have the option of filing either quarterly or monthly. So some of these groups might be monthly filers, in which case they will get to file a report on September 20th and again on October 20th. If they're a quarterly filer, they have to file a report covering the third quarter of this year on October 15th. And again, we'll have to file a pre-general election report that covers sort of the first part of October with the FEC by October 27th. So these are some key dates to put on your calendar, circle them, have reminders, and come back to some of the organizations that you care about. And one of the best resources that I know about for making sure that you have these federal committees on your radar is a tool that the FEC rolled out relatively recently, a couple years ago, called FEC Notify, which allows you to get real-time email alerts whenever a new campaign finance report is filed for a specific committee. You can sign up for free for these alerts on the FEC's website. Go to fecnotify.fec.gov. You can create an account, sign up for various committees. So whether it's a candidate committee, a party committee, a super PAC that you're interested in, and basically anytime that a new report comes in, you will get an email straight to your inbox saying, hey, this report is available. And it's got a nice little summary of certain information, as you can see here in this example. It's got a table saying this is how much was raised, this is how much was spent, this is the ending cash on hand, and it allows you to, download that CSV file if you want to jump into the data yourself, or go to the website, see the HTML file, see the PDF file. All of these links there in those email alerts, just a tremendously helpful tool to monitor the groups, the candidates, the groups, the party committees, the PACs, the super PACs, anything that reports to the FEC, you can get these email notifications about. Super, super helpful. And when these new campaign finance filings come in, here are some of the key questions that I think should be top of mind. Who are the super PAC's top donors? What portion of the money that a super PAC raised came from the top X number of donors, whether that's one donor single-handedly funding a super PAC, if it's, the top 3, the top 5, top 10, how many $1 million contributions did a super PAC receive, or $100,000 contributions? If most of the money a super PAC is receiving is coming from a single source or a handful of sources, that can be really helpful contextual information for the public to know, especially when so many of these super PACs have innocuous anodyne sounding names that are really hard to distinguish from the noise. Being able to tie a super PAC to the funders helps give the public important context about what interests that super PAC is advocating for. I also think it's important to pay attention to say, are there any publicly traded companies funding this super PAC, any labor unions? Again, these filings can help show patterns and connections between what interests might be behind a very innocuously named organization. And as I alluded to earlier, sometimes we see money from dark money organizations, 501c4, 501c6 trade associations, or even mysterious companies such as LLCs contributing to a super PAC. And in those cases, again, I think it's extremely important to dig into the most opaque money coming into super PACs and try to shine a light on it. On the flip side, these filings also show where super PAC funds are going. So where is the money going? Is it going to ads? Is it going to salaries? Is it going to telemarketing and fundraising firms? Which vendors earn the most money? All of these are really key questions as you try to flesh out what might be happening with a group that's active in a particular race or run by consultants in your area. And sometimes there's really great stories to be told about super PACs or traditional PACs that say they're one thing, but end up not spending very much money on political activity at all, and might be run by folks who are just trying to get rich in the process. And you think that you might have heard the phrase scam PAC thrown around from time to time, and scam PACs are certainly something that the Department of Justice has been taking seriously and trying to crack down on as well. And it's, of course, very unfortunate if people give money to a political entity thinking that they're supporting a certain cause or a group that's going to back a certain candidate, and then none of that money goes towards political activity. And not everybody reads all the fine print, or not everybody is super savvy on the internet when it comes to trying to figure out how to donate to a group or a cause that they care about. So these are sort of important questions that the FEC filings can help you answer. And as I alluded to just moments ago, when you've got that opaque money coming into a super PAC, that in and of itself can be a really good story. A couple years ago, we saw a regional reporter in Hawaii notice that a Hawaii company had donated a large sum of money to a group backing a Republican senator on the other side of the country. The Campaign Legal Center ended up filing a complaint in this situation, and the Department of Justice looked into it further and figured out that a former defense contractor was using an LLC to try to evade the limelight, and had ended up also under being able to give the appearance of this, sort of innocuous LLC funding a group, when actuality it was the company funding the LLC that funded the super PAC. And they also illegally reimbursed some employees for making campaign contributions, which is another big no-no. And even just earlier this year, the Campaign Legal Center also filed a complaint in Wyoming about an LLC that had sort of popped up supporting a super PAC that had just popped up. And again, all of this gets to the notion that one of the big guardrails in campaign finance is that there is something called the prohibition of giving money in the name of another, sometimes referred to as the straw donor rule. And so you can't give money to somebody else to give to a candidate. You also can't create an LLC out of thin air with the sole purpose of giving money to a political group or a super PAC. If that's done with the purpose of trying to evade the public attention that having your name attached to the contribution would bring, that is seen as violating the straw donor rule as well. And so again, paying attention to any opaque money, mysterious LLCs can often be a really good story. And here at Issue 1, we published a report last year with some tips for unearthing info about mysterious LLCs. I would recommend bookmarking this tip sheet here. And as you can see, this includes a whole number of questions about how to examine the company's online presence, its social media presence, its website, being able to see if its name shows up in any Google searches or X-ray Google searches, searching just, .gov websites or just .pdf files, this kind of stuff, examining its business records, checking out if it is registered in its home state or is it registered in a state like Delaware, being able to try to figure out whose names are listed on its articles of incorporation or other business records, running its address through different searches, a Google search of its address, seeing if its address shows up in campaign finance searches. So a whole host of ways to try to help pull the curtain back on some of these, mysterious, opaque LLCs. And yes, as I alluded to earlier, there has been an alarming trend of super PACs sometimes getting money from dark money sources, opaque sources, mysterious sources, and not disclosing where their donations are coming through. We're also seeing an alarming trend of super PACs sometimes popping up shortly before Election Day, and therefore not being required to disclose their donors until long after the ballots are cast and counted. So these pop-up super PACs sometimes appear just before Election Day and spend a bunch of money and then shut down after an election. And one of the first clues that you might try to investigate when you see one of these pop-up super PACs is, who is connected to this organization. It will have filed a statement of organization with the FEC. So there might be, a treasurer's name, an address, a website, a phone number, maybe an email address if you're lucky, and being able to see, does this group have a web presence? Does it have a social media presence? Here's a couple of examples from Colorado earlier this cycle, when a group called Democratic Colorado ultimately spent millions of dollars, in some cases trying to promote a election denying Republican in a GOP Senate primary. And this was clearly connected to Democratic organizations and people in the state of Colorado, but it was really unclear who exactly was funding it before Election Day was held. Again, here is the statement of organization that was filed with the FEC. And so here's a treasurer, here's a name, here's an address, here's an email address. Unfortunately, this filing didn't have an actual phone number, but sometimes you're able to suss that out. And ultimately, after the election was over, this group wound down and filed a campaign finance report showing that all of the money it raised actually came from a different Democratic super PAC called Senate Majority PAC. So it was receiving a bunch of money from the national Democratic Senate-focused super PAC and spending it under a different moniker in Colorado. So, people only saw Democratic Colorado on the names of the ads and that kind of thing. But again, this is sort of a key when you look at these new statements of organizations, when you see new ads, when you see new TV ads or radio ads or hear about new mailers in your community, pay attention to that fine print, see whose name appears on the ads and see what you might be able to find out about them from their statements of organization, if nothing else. And I think it's also key to remember that, again, independent spending is supposed to be independent of the candidates themselves. One of the reports that Issue 1 published after the Citizens United decision in the last few years, we published this sort of how to spot coordination report. So coordinationwatch.org was a project that we ran a couple of years ago that really detailed all the different ways that groups have been pushing the envelope in this post-Citizens United world. Some key questions that you might want to keep in mind in the campaign season, is a political candidate raising money for an outside group? is this outside group running an essential part of a candidate's campaign? We've seen groups do everything from run a bunch of TV ads to run a ground game and field organizers to different events that get sponsored and hosted, and then the candidate gets invited to talk at. All of these things are the traditional bailiwick of a candidate, yet big money outside groups are pushing the envelope and able to use big money to help bankroll a candidate's operation in essence. Has a candidate appeared in ads sponsored by an outside group? Did the candidate themselves actually help launch this outside group before launching their campaign? Is a candidate sharing strategic campaign information with an outside group or vice versa? There's a lot of times that you see candidates putting B-roll onto their website or onto their YouTube pages, and that B-roll then can make its way into super PAC funded ads or dark money group funded ads. Sometimes you see very specific information sort of saying, please target these types of voters in this media market. And all of that can be pretty alarming, because these groups are supposed to be independent and not coordinating with the candidates. And another key area that the Coordination Watch project, and you should keep in mind as you pay attention to the coordination issue, is a candidate and an outside group using the same vendor for expenditures. So firms can work for candidates and independent groups, but when that happens, there are supposed to be firewalls in place. If the same person is signing the ad buy for the candidate and for the outside group, you might question how real or robust that firewall actually is. So that's a great thing to keep in mind when it comes to the activities of outside groups as well. Another area that I really want to dig into in this presentation is how to find information about who is funding a dark money group. Here is another tip sheet that I would encourage you all to bookmark. And through my years of experience and the great work of other reporters and other organizations, we've been able to piece together a lot of information about where you might find information about who's funding a dark money group. And it's often like looking for a needle in a haystack, but these can be really valuable haystacks to dig into. And sometimes you can find really valuable and interesting needles when you dig into this. But basically, and we'll go through this in more detail in the slides ahead, sometimes FEC data on the expenditure side in particular will show contributions to a dark money group, because if a traditional PAC or a super PAC makes an expenditure to a dark money group, that shows up, not as the dark money group reporting its donors, but as the PAC making an expenditure in the FEC data. Same thing with the LD-203 filings that cover lobbyist contributions to political candidates and political groups. These show an expenditure by a person to another entity, and sometimes registered lobbyists have to file reports with the House and the Senate in Washington that say, here are all of our political contributions, including contributions to super PACs or politically active groups. And occasionally you might find a dark money group amongst the donors that a lobbyist is voluntarily or mandatorily disclosing in these LD-203 filings. Labor unions have to file annual reports with the Department of Labor. These are known as LM2s. Nonprofits that, the 501c4 social welfare organizations of the world, the 501c6 trade associations of the world, they have to file annual reports with the IRS, which are known as 990s. And in recent years, there's been a larger and larger push for companies to voluntarily disclose more information about their political filing. And those political filings sometimes contain information not just about money to candidates or to parties, but to politically active dark money groups and trade associations and that kind of stuff. So again, the commonality in all of these data sets is that you're looking to find money flowing out of a donor's coffers into a dark money group. Because the dark money group doesn't disclose its funders, you can't start with the dark money group itself. And, you have to sort of work the equation backwards. And sometimes you can stumble into really interesting details about who is underwriting a particular dark money group through one of these sources. So here is the FEC's expenditure data database on its website. Again, this is linked to in the tip sheet, but you can type in the name of any recipient. So if you care about a certain politically active dark money group, for instance, you can type that into the recipient field here on the FEC's expenditure search. And if you're lucky, you will get some hits. So here is an example of the American Action Network, a major conservative dark money player, and it has received money not only from its sort of sister super PAC, which is called the Congressional Leadership Fund, but also by some corporate PACs. So here is money that it has received from the Boeing Political Action Committee, the United Technologies corporate PAC, and so you can see that there are corporate PACs out there giving money to this dark money group and possibly others by searching for the names of these dark money groups on the FEC's website. As I mentioned, all registered federal lobbyists have to report their political contributions twice a year to Congress. These are known as LD-203 filings. And again, sometimes you're lucky, and when you type in the name of a dark money group that you are interested in as the payee or honoree is the name of this filing. Here's an example where 50 grand was given to Crossroads GPS, a major conservative dark money group back in the day, and this lobbyist filing includes that contribution that we wouldn't have known about otherwise. Labor unions, as I mentioned, have very detailed reports that they have to file once a year with the Department of Labor called LM2 filings. And again, they have a payee search. So you can type in the name of a particular entity, a particular dark money group that you're interested in. And if you're lucky, you might come across an actual labor union donor to one of these dark money groups, or more than one labor union funding a dark money group that you're interested in. So here's an example where $100,000 was given by a labor union to a liberal dark money group called Patriot Majority USA. As I mentioned, in addition to the corporation, the labor unions have rules, nonprofits have rules, and companies more and more have been pushed to make voluntary rules about what information they're disclosing to shareholders and to the public about their political giving that they don't necessarily have to report to the FEC or to a state campaign finance regulator. And in the last decade, since Citizens United, there's been a bigger and bigger push for more companies to take more voluntary steps to publish information about their political giving. And because these are voluntary filings, the filings themselves sometimes contain very disparate types of information. Some companies will tell you down to the exact dime how much money they're giving to a politically active nonprofit or candidate, and some groups will just simply say, here are all of the politically active nonprofits and trade associations that we gave at least $50,000 to, or at least $100,000 to, or at least $500,000 to. And there is a wonderful resource by the nonprofit Center for Political Accountability called trackyourcompany.org, which has taken a bunch of these voluntary corporate filings, made them searchable on their website. But again, if you are interested in seeing if a company that you're interested in, a company based in your state, in your region, do they voluntarily disclose any information? Sometimes you can just Google that and say, the name of a company, corporate political giving, and see, what information you can find on the company's website. The trackyourcompany.org website is a really great starting point to say which companies have done this in the past, where has that money gone in the past, but there might be a little bit of lag time between when information is on that database from the Center for Political Accountability and what's available real time on a company's website. And again, because these are voluntary corporate filings, some companies choose to upload that information once a year. Some do it twice a year. There's really not a uniform pattern or a uniform day of the year, but these can be super interesting and valuable for trying to connect money and the beneficiaries of that money. And nonprofit filings are just immensely helpful when looking at dark money groups. A lot of dark money groups themselves are registered as nonprofits, either under Section 501c4 or 501c6 of the tax code. And so even trying to figure out who might be connected to this organization, you can find in the IRS's tax exempt organization business master file, which you'll see this here on the IRS website. You can say download all of the nonprofits in a particular state and say, look for that nonprofit that you're interested in, see when they got tax exempt recognition from the IRS, see what their address is, see who might be connected to it in the official IRS paperwork and filings. And the IRS has a great search on its website for searching for tax exempt organizations, either by its EIN number or by the name of the organization. And these are really great places to start. And also in more recent years, the groups that file IRS 990 filings electronically, which is nearly every organization now at this point, the IRS does make these 990 filings available on its own website. In the past, those groups, the IRS wasn't making those documents available for groups, and you could request paper copies from the IRS, but there were a lot of groups like GuideStar or the Foundation Center that were out there gathering those 990 filings. And today, GuideStar and the Foundation Center now operate under a new name. They merged. They're called Candid. They have a great 990 finder on their website. ProPublica has an excellent nonprofit database called Nonprofit Explorer, where you can find 990s. You can search not only by the name or EIN number of an organization, you can also search for any keyword or phrase, a person's name, an address, all sorts of keyword searching that you can do there on the Nonprofit Explorer from ProPublica. And you also have that capability on the website citizenaudit.org, which again allows you to search across different 990s. And so in some of our projects and some of my past reporting, I had used these resources to say, type in the name of a nonprofit or the EIN number of a nonprofit and see if that name, that EIN number, pops up in a 990 filing for one entity as making a contribution to the dark money group that I cared about. So, if, for instance, pharma was giving money to a politically active nonprofit that I cared about, being able to find that contribution, you could use a search like citizenaudit.org or ProPublica's Nonprofit Explorer, or you could get the 990 from pharma itself and scroll through all the pages and pages of grants that it makes and discloses, and maybe find the information that you're looking for that way. So Again, citizenaudit.org and ProPublica's Nonprofit Explorer, super valuable because they do these keyword searches where you can type in any name, any address, any EIN number, any phrase, and search across all the nonprofits that they have in their 990 databases and see where else and who else's, 990 filings do those names, numbers, addresses appear. Just wrapping up some of the 990 filing tips. You can, as I mentioned, request a 990 directly from an organization itself. If you do this in writing, they must provide this document to you in 30 days. It's a public record. Also, if you show up at an organization and say, I'd like a 990 in person, they are supposed to provide it to you on that same day. And, again, some groups play ball easier than others. Some groups definitely, accept requests via email and will email you back a PDF copy of their 990. Other ones really drag their feet, make you put it in writing, make you wait those full 30 days before they mail it back to you. Some trade associations, in DC, when we've been working on this, we'll say, sure, we'll make it available to you the day of, just send somebody by and we'll have it available for you. And they'll give you a big, stack of paper, and then it's up to you to scan it and sort through it and all that kind of stuff. And, at the end of the day, these are public records. There is one schedule of the 990 that is sort of treated differently than the others, and that is what's called the Schedule B, which is the names and amounts of all of their contributors. But groups are required to provide a redacted version of their Schedule B that redacts the names of their donors, but still shows you things like how many donors, how many big donors did they have, how much money were they getting from these donors. So again, asking key questions like, was one donor underwriting, a particular organization? Did one donor provide all of the funding, or did the top, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 donors provide all of the funding? How many $1 million donors were there? How many $500,000 donors were there? How many $100,000 donors were there? I mean, these kind of things can be very insightful if a group is trying to present itself as a wide movement, but it only gets money from one source. There's a bit of a dissonance there. And so when you do request these 990s from organizations, we always advise that you also ask for a copy of their Schedule B, knowing that they can redact the names of their donors, but still provide you with that redacted copy of Schedule B. And that can be very insightful for looking at some of the patterns. And as you may have noticed, there's a lot of these different haystacks to look into, a lot of stones to uncover, a lot of obscure government records and public records and voluntary records in the case of some of these corporate filings that can be looked into. But when you find and are able to see and connect these patterns, at the end of the day, a lot of campaign finance reporting is about building and mapping out relationships. Who's in whose corner? Who's going to bat for whom? What does some interest group or donor want in return for their large financial regress? And one of the big projects that we undertook at Issue 1 a few years back was creating a database called Dark Money Illuminated, which took all of these known donors and donor organizations for the top 15 dark money groups. And we made this database trying to tell as much of a story about them, connecting the nonprofit data to the labor union data, to the corporate filings, to the FEC data. And at the end of the day, we were ultimately able to put out this database of about 400 donor and donor organizations. And we threw up all the primary sources, so you can see those on Document Cloud. And, whether it was a labor union filing, an IRS 990 filing, a corporate filing, etc. And I think this is a good resource for anyone, because a company a trade association, any one of these labor unions or entities that donated to a dark money group in the past is a pretty strong contender as an entity or an organization that will continue giving to dark money groups in the future. And I think that this can be a resource because it's a roadmap of who's been active in dark money giving in the past. And when you find these documents, as I've been saying over and over again, they can inform and lead to good stories. Here are a handful of headlines from stories that I wrote in my career as a reporter, connecting money from a particular donor organization to a dark money group, and being able to help tell a larger story of what's involved. And sometimes the information also just ends up not being the headline, but really informing a story that's a profile of a group or a donor or something that being able to give additional context about why this dark money group is doing what it's doing, seeing who's funding it is really vital information to try to put out there. And at the end of the day, these are some of the best obscure government records, public records to be looking into to try to tell that story, short of having an inside source give you a group's donors list, taking that internal record and leaking it to you or something. These public records are one of the best ways to try to illuminate what's going on in dark money groups. And again, I think my bottom line message to all of you is that it's vitally important to arm the public with information about who's trying to influence our elections. It's unfortunate that some of these public records are only going to be available long after Election Day, but being able to tell these stories, being able to show the connections between special interests and what they want in Washington is just vitally important. And all of these documents, all of these records that we've talked about, they're all linked to in the tip sheet, and they, I think, can all help make for strong reports, strong investigative reporting that helps you see relationships, see patterns, see connections in a community between different organizations, different political players, different donors, and happy sleuthing. Good luck with your investigations, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me at any time with questions. Here is my contact information, and I really thank you for your time. We are going to turn it over to questions now, and I'm going to stop the recording. But again, thank you so much for your time and your interest in transparency in our political system. I thank you all for the work that you're doing. And again, please don't hesitate to stay in touch with us at Issue One.